They said this wing hadn't been opened in decades. The metal gates were rusted to the floor, the air thick with the smell of dust and something older, something wrong. My flashlight caught fragments of flaking paint. Numbers on doors have flicked by time, and chains hanging where they no longer served a purpose. But it was the far end of the corridor that stopped me cold. Behind a wall of bolted steel, there was a single door, sealed shut from the outside. No official records mention it, no blueprints admit it exists, and yet someone long ago went to extraordinary lengths to make sure no one ever stepped inside. Tonight I'm going to find out why. The beam from my flashlight trembled slightly, though I told myself it was only my hand adjusting its grip. I crouched in front of the sealed door, running my fingers along the cold metal. Layers of dust clung to my gloves like ancient ash. The bolts were thick, industrial grade, the kind you'd expect to find on a Voltiver kill for a simple prison cell. Whoever sealed this door hadn't wanted to keep someone in. They'd wanted to keep something from getting out. I traced the frame. The steel had been welded at the edges, molten beads hardened into ridges. This wasn't the work of the original builders, it was a later addition, done in haste, but thorough. There were no handles, no hinges exposed, just a featureless plate of metal with a faint, almost imperceptible line where the door must once have opened. My breath misted in the stale air. The corridor seemed to narrow behind me, shadows pressing closer, like the building itself was leaning in to watch. Somewhere deep in the prison, a slow drip echoed, each splash amplifying the silence. I leaned in, ear against the cold surface, straining for any sound from inside. Nothing, no shuffling, no scurrying, no movement, just a dead, heavy quiet. But the silence didn't feel empty. It felt occupied. I pulled my recorder from my jacket pocket, clicking it on. Cellblock E, I whispered, my voice sounding strange in the hollow corridor. Sealed cell, bolted and welded from the outside. No sign of official entry points, possible non-documented containment. My own words hung in the air, colder than I intended. From the satchel slung over my shoulder, I produced a crowbar. It was heavy, the metal chilled from the night air, and it seemed to hum faintly in my hands, a trick of my nerves. I told myself. I wedged it under the lowest bolt, testing the give-nothing. The rust was thick, but the metal beneath was solid. I shifted my weight, forcing more pressure. The bolt groaned faintly, a sharp sound that seemed far too loud here. Something clattered. Behind me. I froze, pulse spiking. The flashlight beam darted down the length of the corridor, slicing through floating dust motes, empty. Every door hung open on either side, gaping like dark mouths, but nothing had moved. I swallowed, listening. No footsteps, no breathing except my own. Turning back, I worked the crowbar again. One bolt gave with a sharp crack, tumbling to the floor and sending a metallic ring echoing down the hall. The sound seemed to travel too far, as if the corridor stretched far longer than it looked. I hesitated before moving to the next bolt. That's when I noticed the scratches just above the seam where the door met the frame. There were marks, small at first, then deeper, angrier. Not the clean scrape of tools, but jagged grooves, like something had raked across the steel from the inside. I stepped back, the realization crawling over my skin. Whatever had been in there hadn't been entirely still. My recorder caught the change in my breathing. Multiple claw-like indentations on interior-facing steel. Depth and spread suggest not human. Saying the words out loud felt absurd, but the evidence was there, right under the dust. I forced myself to keep going. The second bolt fought me, groaning and shrieking as I worked it loose. Another clang. This time I was certain I heard something answer, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. A low scrape, then silence again. The third bolt slid free, easier than the rest, as though weakened. I paused to adjust my flashlight, setting it in the crook of my arm so the beam stayed fixed on the door. My hand brushed the floor, and I realized the dust here wasn't uniform. Around the base of the door, it had been disturbed recently. No footprints, but faint streaks, like something had slid along the ground. Every instinct told me to stop. This was the point in every story where the investigator turns back, where the mystery stays unsolved for a reason. But I'd come too far. I'd been chasing whispers about this cell block for months, piecing together fragments from retired guards, yellowing logbooks, and rumors that didn't make sense. All of them led here. The fourth bolt resisted like it knew what was coming. My shoulders ached as I pried at it, the metal screaming. When it finally came free, I nearly lost my balance. Only one remained now, high up near the top corner. I reached for it, my gloves slick with sweat inside. That's when the sound came again, clearer, this time. A slow, deliberate knock from the other side of the steel dot. I froze. Crowbar halfway in position, every muscle locked. The knock came again, 3 times. Then stillness. The logical part of my mind scrambled for explanations. Old pipes, settling metal, vibrations from somewhere else in the prison. But deep down, I knew those knocks weren't mechanical. They were intentional. My hand shook as I forced the final bolt free. It fell with a thud, the echoes devoured by the oppressive silence that followed. The door didn't swing open, it just shifted slightly, the welded seams cracking like brittle ice. A faint draft slipped through the gap, colder than the air around me, carrying with it a smell I can only describe as damp earth and iron. I set the crowbar down and reached into my satchel again, this time pulling out a small cutting torch. Hiss as it lit was almost comforting, a reminder of something controlled in this place of chaos. Sparks danced across the dark as I sliced through the remaining welds. The steel groaned under the torch's heat, almost as if it resented being disturbed. When the last seam gave way, the door tilted forward an inch. I slipped my fingers into the gap and pushed. The hinges screamed in protest, flakes of rust raining down inch by inch. The doorway widened, revealing nothing but blackness beyond. My flashlight couldn't penetrate more than a few feet inside. The beam seemed to die in the air, swallowed by something thicker than darkness. I stood there, on the threshold, aware of how utterly alone I was, or at least, how alone I had been until now. I stepped forward. The moment my boot crossed into the cell, the temperature dropped sharply, as if I'd walked into a winter night. The air was dense, pressing against my skin. My light swept across bare walls coated in something that wasn't quite dust, but had the same clinging quality. The floor was uneven, patches of old stone showing through worn concrete. And then I saw it in the farthest corner. Chained to the wall was a wooden chair. Its surface was blackened in spots, splintered in others, as though it had endured both fire and water over its lifetime. Thick, rusted manacles hung from each armrest, and a heavy iron collar was bolted to the back. The chain links were massive, each one as wide as my fingers, and yet the collar hung open. Empty. I lifted my recorder. Object, containment chair, signs of extreme wear, restraint sized 4, large occupant, status unoccupied. My voice cracked slightly at the end, and I swallowed hard, forcing composure. But there was something else. On the floor beneath the chair, the dust had been disturbed. Not recently, but not decades old either. Circular patterns like something had been dragged around in slow, deliberate arcs, and leading from those circles was a trail of faint, smudged path directly toward where I now stood. I took a step back, my flashlight flickering once, then again. My heart slammed against my ribs, not just from fear but from the growing certainty that whatever had been here had left, and the trail suggested it had left not long before the cell was sealed. Behind me, the door creaked, though I hadn't touched it. The sound sliced through the silence like a blade, slow, deliberate, the metal groaning as if it were being pushed from the outside. I turned sharply, flashlight beam snapping toward the doorway. The heavy steel slab which I'd forced open minutes earlier had shifted another inch, as though nudged by an unseen hand. My chest tightened. I was sure no draft was strong enough to move something that weighty. The beam of my light jittered across the empty corridor beyond. Nothing moved. No figures, no flicker of shadow against the far walls. Yet the sensation of being watched pressed harder against me, settling into my shoulders like a weight. I stepped toward the door, my boots scuffing against the uneven floor. The chain collar on the chair rattled faintly behind me, and I stopped mid-step. The sound hadn't come from my movement. It was too sharp, too intentional. I turned slowly, bringing the light back to the far corner. The chair hadn't moved, but the manacles on one armrest hung differently now. The links twisted, swinging gently as though something invisible had just passed by and brushed against them. My breath fogged in the freezing air, drifting slowly toward the floor before dissipating. Recording possible environmental disturbance, I whispered into my recorder, my voice sounding far away even to myself. Temperature continues to drop. Unexplained movement of objects within sealed environment. As I spoke, my light flickered again. Not the stuttering of a dying battery, but a single, deliberate dimming, as if something had stepped between me and the beam. I instinctively took a step back toward the doorway. The darkness beyond it looked almost safe compared to the suffocating black that pooled in the corners of this cell. That's when I heard a faint, dragging sound, low to the ground. It came from the far wall, just beyond the reach of my flashlight's edge. I steadied the light, forcing the beam to hold steady, and caught a glimpse of the floor being disturbed, like something moving just under the surface of the dust. I felt my grip on the crowbar tighten. The rational part of me screamed to leave now, to retreat back into the corridor, seal the door, and pretend I'd never been here. But the other part, the part that had spent months chasing this forgotten cell block, pushed me forward. I crossed the room slowly, each step landing with exaggerated care. The dragging sound ceased when I reached the wall. My flashlight illuminated something etched into the stone just above the floorline, faint carvings, their edges softened by time, words not in English. The letters curved and twisted, some almost forming shapes rather than characters. I knelt down, brushing the dust away. My gloves came back coated in a thin dark residue, sticky despite its age, dried long ago, but enough to make my skin crawl. Beneath the leather, the carvings were deep, deliberate, and arranged in concentric circles. The center of the circle was bare, as if something had once been mounted there, or had grown from it. I lifted the recorder again. Symbols on interior cell wall, language unknown, arranged in concentric patterns. possible ritual or containment design. My words faltered on that last phrase, containment. The thought sat heavy in my mind, heavier than the door I'd just forced open. Behind me, the chains rattled again, louder this time, sharper as though yanked. I spun around. The chair still sat in its corner, but the manacles were now taut. The links stretched out toward the center of the room as if pulled by unseen wrists, and then came the whisper. It wasn't in the air. It was inside my head, a low, curling sound that had no language but carried intent all the same. A beckoning, a warning. Both. My vision narrowed for a moment, the edges of the room blurring into shadow. I staggered back a step, my boot heel striking the concentric carvings on the floor. The instant I made contact, the temperature plummeted further, and the whisper cut off, replaced by a deep, resonant thud from somewhere far below. The ground beneath my feet vibrated faintly, like the pulse of something buried but alive. I aimed my flashlight at the carvings again. In the center of the circles, the dust shifted, spiraling slightly as though drawn by some hidden current. My instincts screamed that I should leave, but my body didn't move. I found myself staring into that bare patch of stone, waiting, though I didn't know for what. The movement stopped, silence, and then the chair was empty no longer. It happened in less than a blink. One moment. Nothing. The next, a shape sat, bound in the restraints, tall and slumped forward, its head hanging low. My breath caught in my throat, freezing there. The figure was wrong. Too long in the limbs, too sharp at the joints. Its skin, or what passed for skin, was pale, stretched, and fractured like dry earth. The collar clamped around its neck now looked impossibly tight, as if it had grown into place over years, maybe decades. My flashlight beam shook violently, in my hand, scattering shadows across the cell. The thing didn't move. I forced my voice into the recorder, though it was barely more than a whisper. Entity manifest in containment chair, humanoid in general form. Height approximately 2 meters, movement none. The moment I spoke, the head lifted. Not fast, just a slow, deliberate tilt upward until the hollow sockets where eyes should have been were fixed on me. The air turned heavy, pressing in against my chest, making it hard to breathe. My ears rang faintly, as though I'd just stepped into a high-pressure chamber. The figure didn't speak, but something inside my head shifted thoughts that weren't mine brushing against my own. I staggered back toward the door. My flashlight beam caught the steel frame, and I realized, with a sick twist in my stomach, that the door was almost fully closed now. I lunged for it, the beam swinging wildly across the cell. In that flash of light, I saw the figure was no longer in the chair it was standing. My boots scraped against the floor as I threw my weight against the steel. The door didn't budge. Behind me, the sound of chain links dragging grew louder, closer. My breath came in short, ragged bursts. I dropped the crowbar, grabbed the edge of the door with both hands, and heaved. The steel groaned, moving just enough to let a cold gust from the corridor wash over me. That small draft felt like the only lifeline I had left, and then a hand not cold, but impossibly hot closed around my shoulder. The heat seared straight through my jacket, blistering even through the fabric, and I yanked forward instinctively, wrenching myself free. The motion sent me stumbling into the doorframe, the edge biting into my ribs. My flashlight skipped from my grip, clattering across the corridor outside, its beam spinning wildly over cracked tiles and rusted bars. Behind me, the sound of breathing filled the cell. Slow, deep, and wrong, like bellows pulling air through a furnace. I didn't dare turn around. Instead, I lunged for the flashlight, my boot slipping on the dust-polished floor. The beam steadied in my hand just as something scraped across the stone behind me, deliberate, measured, closing the gap between us. Move, I hissed under my breath, though I didn't know if I was talking to myself or to the stubborn, grinding door. I shoved my shoulder into it, feeling the steel shift a fraction wider. Cold air spilled into the cell again, carrying the faint scent of rain from somewhere deep in the abandoned prison. Then silence. I froze mid-push, my muscles locked. No breathing now, no footsteps, just the faint ringing in my ears. My flashlight beam trembled across the doorway, skimming over the far corner of the cell. Empty. The chair sat vacant once more, manacles hanging slack. But I knew the thing hadn't simply vanished. I stepped backward into the corridor, dragging the door with me. My movements were slow, deliberate, careful not to turn my back fully to the cell. The air in the hallway felt lighter, but only slightly, as though whatever was inside still pressed against the threshold, watching. When the door was nearly shut, a sudden force slammed into it from the other side. The steel rang out, vibrating under the impact, nearly knocking me off my feet. I caught myself on the wall, breath rasping in my throat. Another blow came, heavier, denting the metal outward an inch before it snapped back. Something inside roared. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't even animal. It was the grinding of stone, the tearing of wood, the hiss of steam, all layered and twisted into something that hit me in the chest, like a physical weight. My legs went weak, my vision blurring for a moment. I jammed the crowbar back into the frame, wedging it tight as a brace. The door groaned but held. For now the hallway stretched empty in both directions, my flashlight revealing only dust and peeling paint. My instincts screamed to run, but I forced myself to stop just outside the cell. I pulled my recorder from my pocket with shaking hands. Time, my voice cracked. I swallowed. Time unknown. Entity attempted breach of containment. Door, integrity compromised. Recommend immediate resealing. Do not engage further. As I spoke, the door shuttered again. A deep rhythmic pounding began from the inside, slow at first, then quickening. The sound rattled through the bolts I'd removed earlier. Still lying scattered on the floor, I turned and moved fast for quiet down the corridor. The beam of my flashlight caught open doorways on either side, each cell a hollow void that seemed to lean toward me as I passed. Somewhere above, water dripped steadily. The noise, amplified by the silence, started at the far end of the block. The corridor turned sharply to the left. I stopped just short of it, pressing my back to the wall. My breathing was too loud in the stillness. I counted to 3, then swung the beam around the corner. The hallway beyond was lined with more cells, their doors closed but unbolted. My light swept over rusted bars and cracked concrete, revealing more dust, more neglect. But halfway down, one door stood open, a faint glow seeping out from inside. The light wasn't from my flashlight. It pulsed faintly, an almost sickly orange like embers breathing. I stepped forward slowly, my boots silent on the worn floor. The glow didn't waver, didn't grow or shrink as I approached. When I reached the open cell, I saw the source. In the center of the floor, etched into the concrete, was a symbol to the concentric carvings in the sealed cell, but smaller and more intricate. The grooves were filled with something molten, glowing faintly as it pulsed in time with an almost imperceptible hum in the air. My mind registered details, automatically lines intersecting at impossible angles, small runes clustered at the edges, a faint scent of burnt metal. But my attention locked on the trail of dust leading into the cell identical to the one I'd seen under the chair, curling outward from the center of the symbol toward the hallway. I crouched, holding the recorder close. Secondary containment symbol found in open cell, active state unknown, signs of recent disturbance. The hum grew louder. It wasn't coming from the floor anymore, it was coming from behind me. I turned, and the corridor I'd just walked down was gone. In its place was nothing but black, stretching endlessly. My flashlight beam vanished into it without finding a surface. I stumbled backward into the cell, my pulse hammering in my ears. The glow from the floor intensified, and the hum became a vibration in my bones. The dust trail at the edge of the symbol shifted, curling inward like a living thing. Then I saw the hand that emerged from the darkness outside the cell, long-fingered and too thin, its joints bending wrong. The heat radiating from it hit me before it was fully visible. It didn't touch the floor, just hung there in the threshold, twitching once before curling its fingers in a beckoning motion. I couldn't move. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs refused to obey. My flashlight slipped again, its beam cutting across the symbol. The moment the light touched the center, the glow flared. The hum stopped. For a fraction of a second, there was absolute silence, no breath, no drip of water, no vibration in the floor. Then, with a sharp, cracking sound, the entire symbol went dark. The hand was gone, but the corridor hadn't returned. Outside the open cell was still only blackness, swallowing everything. The air pressed heavy around me, as if the walls had closed in, though I knew they hadn't moved. A whisper crawled into my mind, again not the same one from before. This one was sharper, clearer. It spoke no words I recognized, yet I understood its meaning with terrible certainty. You've opened the wrong door. And then, from somewhere deep within that blackness outside, something began to move. The movement was slow at first, so slow I could almost convince myself it was the shifting of my own vision. But the sound came next, a faint scrape like nails dragging across stone, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. My flashlight beam stabbed into the black, swallowed instantly, the light unable to find depth or form. I took a step back, my heel brushing the cooled etchings of the symbol on the floor. The moment my boot made contact, the carvings seemed to pulse faintly. Again, a single heartbeat of dull orange light, before going dark once more. The scraping grew louder, faster, until it became a distorted rhythm. I could feel it in the floor, now felt tremors that made the dust shift in small, chaotic patterns. My breathing picked up loud in the suffocating silence between each scrape, and then it stopped. The black ahead of me shimmered faintly like heat rising from asphalt, and something began to take shape. First the outline, a hunched figure, far too tall to fit comfortably in the corridor. Then the edges sharpened, revealing a body draped in shadows that clung to it like a living shroud. That its head was wrong, not too large, not too small, but unfixed, as though it shifted subtly every time I blinked. What remained constant were the eyes, or where the eyes should have been. They were empty sockets, but deep inside each, a faint ember glowed, pulsing, slowly, in time with the tremor in the floor. The thing didn't move forward. It just stood there, filling the space where the hallway should have been, the darkness bleeding around it in slow curls. I couldn't tell if it was blocking the path or if it was the path. My recorder felt heavy in my pocket, but I forced my hand into it, pressing the button. My voice came out hoarse. Unidentified entity manifesting in non-physical corridor space. Height approximate 3 meters. No visible facial structure. The embers flared. It happened in less than a second, but it felt stretched into minutes. The blackness surged forward, swallowing the threshold of the cell. The air turned blistering hot, searing the inside of my nose and throat. My flashlight flickered violently, then went out completely, leaving me in total darkness. I staggered back until my spine hit the far wall. My hands swept over the floor, searching blindly for the dropped crowbar, for anything. The heat pressed closer, wrapping around me until my skin prickled and my jacket stuck to my back with sweat. Then, in that oppressive dark, the whisper returned. That was right next to my ear now, not in my head but in the air, the sound wet and rasping. No language, no words, just the weight of meaning forced into my mind. Images flickered unbidden, the sealed door slamming shut, molten chains snapping closed, the concentric symbols flaring to life in a place far older than this prison. The images vanished as quickly as they came, replaced by silence. And then, cold. The heat evaporated in an instant, replaced by air so frigid it bit through my gloves and numbed my fingertips. My breath came out in heavy clouds and my teeth chattered involuntarily. The sudden change disoriented me, and when I opened my eyes without realizing I'd closed them, the blackness outside the cell was gone. The corridor had returned, but it was wrong. The walls looked the same. The peeling paint and rusted bars all where they should be, but the light was different. A faint, unnatural gray filled the air, as if the entire place were submerged underwater. My footsteps made no sound when I moved to the doorway, and when I looked down, there were no footprints in the dust, not even my own. I stepped out cautiously, every nerve in my body on edge. The silence here was complete, not even the distant drip of water breaking it. I turned to look back into the cell I'd just left. The symbol on the floor was gone, not faded, not worn away. Gone. The concrete was smooth, bare, as though it had never been carved at all. My stomach dropped. Whatever that symbol had been doing, containment, protection, a warning, it was over now. I started moving down the corridor, flashlight still dead in my hand. The strange gray light seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere, casting shadows that didn't match my movements. Every doorway I passed was empty, but each one left me with the feeling of being observed from just beyond sight. Halfway down the block, I saw a door hanging open just enough to reveal darkness inside. The number above it was missing, the metal plate torn away long ago. Something about that door pulled at me, the same way the sealed cell had. I reached out and nudged it open. The hinges didn't squeal, they didn't make any sound at all. Inside, the cell was empty. No bed frame, no sink, no markings on the walls. Just a square of bare concrete. And in the center of the floor, a single bolt. It was one of the bolts. The same thick, industrial kind I'd pried from the sealed door. But it wasn't rusted now. It was clean, polished, as if it had just been forged. I crouched down, my fingers hovering above it. The moment my glove made contact, the world around me shifted. The walls of the cell elongated, stretching upward into shadow. The floor dropped away under my knees. And suddenly I was kneeling on something entirely different, smooth black stone, warm beneath my hands. In the distance, faint orange light flickered, reflecting off wet surfaces. The bolt in my palm pulsed once, twice, then grew hot enough to burn through the glove. I hissed in pain and dropped it. It didn't hit the floor, it simply vanished. The flickering light ahead grew brighter, and I could see now that it wasn't fire, it was molten metal, flowing in slow rivers through channels cut into the black stone. Above them, shapes moved, not human, not even vaguely human, but massive, gliding with the deliberate slowness of something that had never been hurried in its existence. The whisper came again, louder this time, closer. I turned toward it. I found myself standing back in the empty cell in the prison corridor, the bolt gone, my glove smoldering where it had burned through. The strange gray light still hung in the air, but the temperature was rising again. From far down the corridor, I heard the sound of chains dragging across stone, steady, unhurried, coming closer. The sound was deliberate. Each link scraped against the floor with a weight that made the vibrations ripple through the soles of my boots. The corridor seemed to grow longer with every heartbeat, stretching away into a haze of gray light where the source of the sound remained hidden. I backed toward the far wall, every instinct screaming that distance wouldn't help. The chain noise grew louder, sharper, until it began to echo off the steel bars of the empty cells. It wasn't random, it had a rhythm. 4 steps, drag. 4 steps, drag. I raised my recorder with trembling hands. Audible approach from unknown entity. Patterned movement. Distance. Closing rapidly. The words were little more than breath, each one fogging the cold air between me and the wall. The first shadow appeared at the far end of the block, long, impossibly long, sliding over the peeling paint and cracked floor. It didn't match the faint shape I'd glimpsed earlier in the blackness. This shadow moved like water poured over jagged rock, rippling and bending without any clear source. Then the light shifted. The gray haze thickened, as if someone had turned a lens, pulling focus away from the corridor itself and toward whatever was stepping into view. A figure emerged, not walking but gliding, the chains spilling from its hands like liquid metal. Its body was tall but wrong in proportion, the shoulders hunched unnaturally high, the limbs tapering too sharply at the ends, its head tilted to one side, studying me the way one might study an insect on glass. The eyes, or what occupied their place, were no longer embers, they were mirrors, cold, polished surfaces that reflected the corridor, the bars, even me. But in the reflection I wasn't standing where I was inside the sealed cell again. My breath caught. I blinked, and the mirrored eyes brightened faintly, pulling at my thoughts like a tide. I tried to look away, but my gaze kept returning to that reflection of myself. The image began to change, my figure twisting, slumping, manacles appearing around my wrists and ankles as if they had always been there. The chain sound stopped. The figure was still halfway down the corridor, but somehow its shadow reached my boots. Cold spread up my legs like ice water, seeping through muscle and bone. Then, the whisper returned. Not in my ear, not in my head, everywhere. It filled the air, the walls, the floor, a resonance that made my teeth ache. I couldn't understand the words, but the meaning pressed into me. You've already been here before. I stumbled back into the open cell I'd just left, thinking the walls might give me some kind of cover. The light in the corridor dimmed instantly, as though stepping away had starved it. In that momentary darkness, something brushed my shoulder light, almost gentle, but hot enough to sting. I swung my flashlight up in reflex. It sputtered to life for a single flicker. The figure was gone, but the chains were inside the cell now, coiled across the floor like a nest of serpents. They glistened faintly in the half-light, their surfaces engraved with the same impossible symbols I'd seen carved into the sealed cell's walls. At their center sat the bolt, the same polished, untouched bolt I'd burned my glove on minutes ago. It pulsed faintly, in time with my heartbeat. I stepped back, but the chains shifted toward me, not with the clinking of metal but with a slow, dragging hiss as though they were alive. My heel hit the wall, and I realized there was nowhere left to go. The whisper changed pitch. Not words this time, laughter low, steady, humorless. It filled the cell, pressing against my skull until it felt like my thoughts were vibrating out of sync. My vision blurred at the edges. Then the bolt lifted from the floor. No hand touched it. It rose slowly, impossibly, the chains winding upward to wrap around it in neat, deliberate coils. The pulsing grew stronger, and with each beat, the walls of the cell seemed to push outward, revealing glimpses of somewhere else, those molten rivers of metal, the massive shapes gliding through heat and shadow, the sensation of standing somewhere, both infinite and claustrophobic at once. I tried to close my eyes, but the images were inside my head now. I could see the sealed cell as it had been decades ago. The chair occupied, the manacles taut, the door bolted in place by hands that worked in frantic silence. I saw the symbols carved into the walls glowing bright enough to burn. I saw that, the moment the final weld was set and the last person left this place, knowing it wouldn't hold forever, the vision snapped away, the chains dropped to the floor. Lifeless once more, the bolt landing with a metallic ring that seemed far too loud in the silence that followed. The gray haze in the corridor was gone. The normal if decayed light of the abandoned prison returned. My breathing was sharp, ragged. I grabbed the recorder, forcing my voice steady. Unknown event. Terminated abruptly. Entity, location unknown. Bolt recovered, appears inactive. Recommend immediate. The recorder cut off, not from damage. The battery was fine. It simply stopped recording, as if something had told it to. A faint creak echoed from somewhere, far down the block. I turned toward it, the bolt still in my hand. At the far end of the corridor, the sealed door was there again, perfect, intact, all bolts in place, as though none of this had happened. Only this time, it was open just a crack. I stared at it for what felt like minutes, waiting for movement, for sound, for anything. Nothing came. The air remained still heavy. I didn't step forward. I didn't want to know what would happen if I did. Instead, I backed away, keeping my eyes on that narrow gap until the corridor bent out of sight. The bolt in my hand was cold now, almost comforting in its weight. I slipped it into my jacket pocket and didn't look back. Some doors aren't meant to stay sealed. Some were never sealed at all. And in this place, I'm no longer sure which is worse. For more untold truths, keep watching The Forgotten Cell. For more untold truths, keep watching The Forgotten Cell.